I think it's really cool that, from my perspective, it was hitting a kind of common point with this inflationary cosmology department at MIT. And also at the same time, before you do a comparative analysis, you should realize what it is you're really looking for from these questions. And they're really about understanding boundaries. That's all it is. Because when you're talking about eternal inflation, that's something, first of all, I totally subscribe to, because on the surface area of a sphere, you can have infinite points, which they themselves can be their own spheres, and they have their own surface area with their own points. They can keep bubbling up, so you'll keep inflating for what feels like forever. And I've spoken about having different material or skin on one. But also, I would like to maybe take a step back and draw attention to something I found kind of interesting. I made this diagram that I called Grab Anywhere. This is not representing any particular region or domain. It's just if there was a quick snapshot within a circle of like all these different universes, and the expansion of a point to a sphere is probably more linked towards how much it has been realized. Well, something I thought about too is when things are infinitely close to each other, what separates one from the other? Like if how I showcase these circles and you're just kind of grabbing anywhere, depending on whether that has been realized yet or not, I guess you're in a space of infinite potentiality. Because when I'm drawing these circles, what am I really doing? I'm trying to find a boundary of what creates this versus that. And really, too, when there are, like, imagine like a Venn diagram, but imagine it with spheres, and imagine more than two. When there is so much overlap to where it would be infinitesimally small, the difference between all these spheres, is there some type of perhaps subtractive force that removes any redundancy when there's so much similarity between these realities? Could that be the creation of another sphere point? Once again, like it's very awkward for me to use words like this when I know in actuality that comes from the perspective of me being human and is probably misrepresenting the nature of reality. But it's really to bring about a question of like, yeah, there can be multiple sizes. It depends on how you look at things, where you group them. Like you could group it here and and here, and you can tell these two are separate, but you could group here and also group here, where there's just a very slight difference. And those things could be their own universe. So yeah, that's kind of my line of thinking when it comes to eternal inflation. When I think of collision, think about like two cars, for example. If, things are here, they're not together yet, but they're coming closer and closer together. So originally they start apart. And breaking down what apart means is that there's distance between these two cars and there's a space in between them. So that space, that's for like a very earthly situation. But what happens when you apply it to universes? What's in that space in between? When it comes to the concept of parallel and multiple universes, where does our universe end and the next one begin? So, in my line of thinking, it's not a complete empty void vacuum between two very obviously different universes. The way I sort of see it is, if on their own surface area there can be more universes and those universes have their own surface area, then maybe here there are things that sort of in the substrate kind of connect them, perhaps draw them in, whatever is governing collision and what that looks like. And in this space between, it's also asking ourselves, are all of these universes realized? Do they all have their own material and skin? And I guess if infinite realities were all realized, perhaps we could make an argument that there's no need for any laws of physics or understanding of dynamism, because dynamism, movement, shifting, transformation is often working with dualities. And if everything infinitely exists all at once, there wouldn't really be dualities. So another aspect of the skeletal look is I say awareness is fundamental. Another thing too is these papers are using general relativity. I'll touch on this in another video, but I make the claim that gravity is an emergent force. But in thinking of the space in between, so there's this latent potential and there's awareness everywhere. And I was even thinking of maybe my own bias on how awareness moves, as if it's like in a single point. It's in a single point. It's also in the point next to it and everywhere infinitely in between outside. And so all of this awareness has this capability to realize any reality at any given point. But whether that affects the dynamics of our universe is an interesting question. So if awareness is everywhere and from different vantage points, different universes can be realized, I think that's really the sweet nectar of all of this, understanding or wanting to understand, is there something beyond what we know? Is there a drop-off point to where our laws of physics end and another one begins? Because I come from a consciousness background, I like to see how we can apply it to us. So there was one time I took LSD and I claimed that there were these other entities speaking to me, through me, within me. And a few people pointed out that they don't think that's the case. They actually think those were different aspects of my consciousness. It just felt so unfamiliar and so separate that I saw it as something different, kind of the same way that your bubble universe and a separate one could be seen as different. But you know, as this collision kind of takes place and you're trying to understand what does it look like for a universe to collide with ours, I would say you could apply your conscious innerverse and cosmology to an external one and see some common patterns there. So the conversations I had with friends were more like, you know, I think those are just parts of you. From my perspective, it felt like some of these things were so alien. Maybe it was something different. I do believe I was able to perceive beyond what the self is. But then I started thinking, what if those two ideas don't have to be separate? What if it could be the case that there's real difference, but once awareness captures it, subject object duality collapses. And so at that point, because that information was now filtered through my brain for me to perceive it, it did come out as me. It became a part of me and my inner psyche. That information has to travel through my physical form and be transmitted in audible speech. So at that point, yeah, I would agree with them that it became me. And one of my friends also kind of pushed the envelope there, and he's like, the next challenge is there anything that's not you? And I think that's really fascinating. So if we apply that question to our universe, it's whatever we become aware of that seems different has now become also a part of our universe. I guess that's why there's the term observable universe. And so in turn, it would end up following the laws of the form that we have. Even in my conclusion, in realizing there's this eternal, infinite reality, when do you stop telling the story about it? And in my conclusion, I say, I stop once I realize it never stops. And I kind of make the case for how the form of something is where consciousness chooses to stabilize. But like the more we inspect form and its boundaries, we realize that too is an illusion. It's part of that nested infinity. It also opens up an interesting conversation about parallel perpendicular infinite universes. I realize when I use the word proximity, I'm using once again a human term, and I'm talking about things that are before time and before humans and beyond all of this. However, I do feel like the way I've structured this, I get an intuitive hunch that uh, the greater the proximity is between these sphere points, the more similarity there is in between these realities, and then the more separated they are. Of course, there's differences in what maybe the material is and how the dynamics of that reality are. However, I also do think that the more expansive these universes become, the more overlap they'll find with one another and connect. I feel you can even apply this to human consciousness, that you can start off two human beings that are diametrically opposed with viewpoints and backgrounds and upbringing, but as they both expand their inner verses, it becomes more inclusive, and they'll actually find that they have things that overlap, that are in common. Their inner verses, their bubble universes from their internal cosmology would collide in this sense and actually unite their principles. It's a deeper conversation on what expansion really is. It's also inclusivity, it's also integration, it's also an expansion of extremities, of as above, so below. There's even another paper that kind of looks at this from the perspective of how the behavior or perception of cosmic microwave background radiation can evolve depending upon how we're working with universes, multiples of them, and the awareness of them. And that paper is from 2026, and the MIT one is from 2011. So I guess what we've really been doing over the years is enhancing the ways that we are trying to almost probe reality and to find different behaviors, geometries that we can use as tools to leverage how we inspect what governs reality to reveal itself to us.